part of the Garza lab, which is a dermatology lab at Johns Hopkins, and the PI is Dr. Luis Garza, who's a dermatologist at Hopkins. We are currently working on a skin disease called hidradenitis suppurativa that usually affects females more than males and affects African Americans and non-Hispanic blacks more often than other racial and ethnic groups. And so this disease usually manifests as skin nodules and abscesses and can lead to sinus tracts formation and fistulas formation. And so we at Hopkins have noticed that this disease is increasing in prevalence, especially within the last 20 years or so. And so we got interested in what might be causing this disease. Now, a lot of our patients in clinic would come in and tell us that opting for a Mediterranean diet would help them control their symptoms, in contrast to other patients who would come in and tell us that opting for a Western diet would exacerbate their symptoms. So we thought that the difference in those diets might have something to do with the causality of this disease. So basically what we did is that we collected data on the first changes in the Western diet within the last 20 years or so to try to compare it to the Mediterranean diet, which we already know has some anti-inflammatory properties, but we wanted to dive in more into the differences between the Western diet and the Mediterranean diet. We also looked at the data and the increase in the HS prevalence within the last 20 years or so. And so what we found was that the Western diet has changed within the last 20 years in a way that the consumption of ultra-processed foods has increased and the consumption of minimally processed foods has decreased. Now, ultra-processed foods are foods that have been industrialized and foods that contain additives, for example, like burgers, nuggets, sodas, and so the foods that we all love. As for the minimally processed foods, they are more like natural foods like fruits and vegetables, nuts and grains, for example. So we did look at the change in minimally processed foods consumption and ultra-processed foods consumption, and we tried to correlate that with the change in the hidradenitis suppurativa prevalence in the US. And the results were actually interesting because we saw that there is a strong positive correlation with the increase in ultra-processed foods consumption and the increase in HS versus the decrease in minimally processed foods consumption and the increase in HS. So basically, in conclusion, our results indicate that there is a strong link between the consumption of ultra-processed foods and hidradenitis suppurativa. And we do think that minimally processed foods can have a huge impact on patients with HS via protecting them from the disease. First, we always emphasize a lot on lifestyle changes, whether being through effects on the general health or whether being on the effects on dermatologic health, because people often underestimate that, so this is very important. Your diet is very important, so we have a golden rule that we call in clinic our golden rule, and we tell this to all of our patients, not just our HS patients, that always opt for natural foods instead of opting for minimally processed foods. We are currently doing a lot of work on this project, and we are trying to figure out what specific components of the ultra-processed foods might be causing HS, and we kind of want to figure out the pathway of how this is happening, not just have an idea, because our work is was like a pilot work, preliminary data, but now we want to focus more on finding out the exact pathway of this happening. So we are currently working on several projects in our lab. And actually some of our interesting findings that we haven't published yet, we found that it's not only about the industrialization process that these foods go through, but it also has to do with the types of containers these foods are stored in, whether being on the shelf or being at home, which is very important. And this is going to lead to a lot of other projects and a lot of other efforts to try to see maybe what specific components of the food containers might also be maybe leaking into foods and leading to this disease. So yeah, this is very early efforts.